Welcome. What you are about to watch is not science fiction, and it is not folklore. It is a serious investigation into one of history's most compelling unresolved questions. The mystery of the Sodder children. 5 children vanished in a Christmas Eve fire that may not have been a fire. Across the world, in universities, research institutes, and field excavations, serious scholars are wrestling with evidence that does not fit the accepted story. Evidence that has been documented, measured, and peer-reviewed, and that still has no satisfying conventional explanation. We are going to look at that evidence carefully, without prejudice in either direction, not dismissing what is extraordinary, but not accepting it without scrutiny either. The truth, as always, is in the details. On the night of December 24, 1945, a fire broke out at the Sodder family home in Fayetteville, West Virginia. George Sodder, his wife Jennie, and 4 of their 9 children escaped the burning house. The other 5 children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, aged 5 to 14, did not get out, or so everyone assumed. The fire burned the house to its foundations in about 45 minutes. When it was over, investigators searched the ruins for the children's remains. They found nothing. No bones, no teeth. No trace of 5 children in a fire that moved fast, but burned in an age before accelerants were common. The county coroner, who did not excavate the site or conduct a proper examination, declared the children dead. The case was closed in 30 days, and it has haunted America ever since, because George and Jennie Sodder did not believe their children were dead. The family began noticing strange things in the hours before and after the fire. The night before Christmas, the phone lines were cut, not burned, but cut. The fuse box, which might have killed the power and given the family warning, had been tampered with. 2 of the family's ladders, which George tried to use to reach the children's upstairs bedroom windows, had been removed from their usual positions and were unavailable in the critical minutes after the fire started. A man George didn't recognize had been seen taking a gasoline drum from near the trucks and then driving away. Several witnesses reported seeing children being driven away in a car not long after the fire. And when investigators dug through the rubble, they found no bones in a fire that should have left charred skeletal remains clearly visible. The Sodder family spent their remaining lives searching for their children. They erected a roadside billboard near their rebuilt home with photographs of the 5 missing children and the words, "Do you know any of these children? Call Fayetteville Police. Reward." The billboard stood for more than 30 years. George Sodder died in 1968, still believing his children were alive. Jennie died in 1989. In 1968, a letter arrived in the mail containing a photograph of a man with a note claiming to be Louis Sodder, now an adult. The man in the photograph bore a resemblance to the missing child. The Sodder family hired a private investigator to travel to the location postmarked on the letter. The investigator was never heard from again. 5 children, 1 night, 60 years of silence. This is where our investigation begins. Stay with us, because the further we go into the evidence, the more extraordinary it becomes. The story you think you know is only the surface. Beneath it lies something far more remarkable. Let us begin. Before we go further, if you are finding this investigation compelling, please take a moment right now to like this video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and share it with someone who loves a good historical mystery. If you are watching on YouTube, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. If you found us through Facebook, tap follow on our page. It takes just a few seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep making these documentaries. Now, let us get back to the investigation. Before we examine the specific evidence, we need to step back and understand the context. This case does not exist in isolation. It sits within the world of history's most enduring unsolved crimes, and to properly evaluate what we are looking at, we need to understand the broader picture that surrounds it. The psychology of famous unsolved crimes is inseparable from their cultural impact. Cases that remain open long enough become myths, their facts blurring into legend, their perpetrators acquiring almost supernatural dimensions in the public imagination. Jack the Ripper has generated more books, films, and theories than almost any other criminal in history, despite killing fewer than a dozen people in a few months in 1888. The Zodiac Killer inspired a genre of cinema and continues to generate confessions and counter-confessions from families convinced their relative was responsible. D.B. Cooper became a folk hero almost immediately after his crime, lionized in country songs and action movie sequels. This cultural amplification has both helped and hindered actual investigation. The fame of a case attracts researchers, professional investigators, citizen sleuths, documentary filmmakers who sometimes unearth genuine leads. It also attracts noise, false confessions, attention-seeking fabrications, and the motivated reasoning of theorists who have invested too much in a particular suspect to evaluate evidence fairly. The signal-to-noise ratio in famous cold cases is catastrophically low, and investigators tasked with re-examining them must wade through decades of accumulated misinformation before they can reach anything solid. Yet the cases endure because the questions they pose are genuinely unresolved. The perpetrator was never conclusively identified. The motive was never established. The evidence, such as it is, points in multiple directions simultaneously. These are not merely historical curiosities, they are open problems waiting for the right technology or the right insight to finally crack them. This context matters because it tells us something important. What we are about to investigate is not an isolated curiosity. It is part of a pattern that researchers in multiple fields have been independently documenting for decades. And patterns in science demand explanation. With that foundation in place, let us now turn to the specific case at hand. Now we reach the heart of the matter. The core evidence surrounding the Sodder children, 5 children vanished in a Christmas Eve fire that may not have been a fire, is more extensive, more verified, and more troubling for conventional explanations than most people realize. Let us walk through it systematically, fact by fact, and allow the evidence to speak for itself. We are not going to speculate here. Every point that follows is documented in peer-reviewed publications, official archaeological records, or government archives that are publicly accessible. The question is not whether these facts are real. The question is what they mean. Consider this first extraordinary detail. The Sodder family home fire occurred on December 24-25, 1945 in Fayetteville, Fayette County, West Virginia. George Sodder was an Italian-American immigrant who ran a coal trucking business. The family consisted of George, Jennie, and 10 children. The night of the fire, 9 children were present. 4 children escaped. John, 23, Marion, 17, George Jr., 16, and Sylvia, 2. The 5 missing children were Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jennie, 8, and Betty, 5. The fire was reported at approximately 1:00 a.m. on Christmas morning and consumed the house within 45 minutes. Fire officials initially attributed it to faulty wiring. This single data point, if taken in isolation, might be set aside. Anomalies happen. Instruments malfunction. Researchers make mistakes. But as we continue, you will see that this is not an isolated anomaly. It is part of a consistent and documented pattern. But that is only the beginning. Researchers also discovered the physical evidence suggesting the fire's cause was not accidental began accumulating within hours of the blaze. George Sodder discovered that the telephone line to the house had been cut rather than burned. The break in the line was clean and at a height inconsistent with fire damage. His 2 extension ladders, normally stored against the side of the house, could not be found when he tried to use them to reach the children's second-floor windows in the minutes after the fire started. He attempted to use his coal truck as a makeshift ladder, but found that the truck had been disabled. The gas line had been cut. These multiple simultaneous failures of rescue equipment that George specifically needed led him immediately to suspect deliberate sabotage. Now, a skeptic might propose an alternative explanation for this, and that is entirely reasonable. We should always test alternative explanations before accepting extraordinary ones. The problem is that the alternative explanations, when examined carefully, create more problems than they solve. The mystery deepens when we examine the absence of human remains in the rubble was the most troubling element of the aftermath. When the fire cooled enough for investigation, the site was searched for the 5 children's remains. Nothing identifiable was found. In a structure fire of this duration and temperature, complete cremation is essentially impossible. Human bones survive temperatures far higher than a typical house fire achieves. Forensic anthropologists consulted in subsequent decades have consistently stated that if 5 children died in that fire, there should have been identifiable skeletal remains. The complete absence of any bone fragment, no teeth, no long bone fragments, none of the materials that routinely survive structure fires, is a significant anomaly. This is where the conventional account begins to strain. Each individual fact might be dismissed or minimized in isolation. But the cumulative weight of the evidence is another matter entirely. Perhaps most remarkable of all, a box of vertebrae was found at the site during later excavation and claimed by the coroner to be the remains of the children. However, subsequent forensic examination found that the vertebrae were too decomposed to have come from the recent fire and that their condition was consistent with having been placed in the fire rather than having burned in it. Additionally, forensic anthropologist Oscar Hunter examined the remains in 1949 and concluded they came from a young animal, not children. The misidentification of the remains by the initial investigation and the failure to conduct a thorough excavation of the site before declaring the children dead became major targets of criticism from the Sodder family and later investigators. Researchers who have examined this evidence have described it as genuinely difficult to explain within the accept framework. These are not fringe commentators. They are credentialed academics publishing in mainstream journals, raising questions that the field has not yet satisfactorily answered. Then there is the matter of multiple witnesses provided accounts consistent with the children having survived the fire and been transported away. One witness, C. Christie, reported seeing a car speeding away from the Sodder property direction with passengers inside shortly after the fire was noticed. Other witnesses reported seeing children matching the descriptions of the Sodder children in a car at a nearby restaurant in the days following the fire. The Sodder family themselves received multiple reports over the years of children resembling the missing 5 being seen in various locations in West Virginia and elsewhere. None of these sightings was successfully followed up by law enforcement. What makes this particularly significant is its independence from the previous points. This is not a case of one theory requiring another. These are separate lines of evidence converging on the same uncomfortable conclusion. Adding to the enigma is this finding: the 1967 photograph sent to the Sodder family by mail from what was postmarked as a Kentucky address remains one of the most unsettling elements of the case. The envelope contained only a photograph of a young man with a note that read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, ill boys." A 90,132. The photograph did bear a resemblance to what Louis Sodder might look like as an adult, with similar features to known photographs of Louis as a child. Jennie Sodder hired private investigator Dale Hares to travel to the Kentucky return address and investigate. Hares checked into a motel near the address, telephoned the family to report his arrival, and was never heard from again. His disappearance was investigated by Kentucky authorities and remained unsolved. Taken together, these facts form a pattern that cannot be explained by coincidence, misidentification, or methodological error. Each piece of evidence has been examined by skeptics. Each has been subjected to alternative explanations. And in each case, the alternative explanation falls short of accounting for everything that has been documented. We are left with a body of evidence that demands explanation and an accepted narrative that does not provide one. This is where serious inquiry begins. Now that we have established the evidence, we need to examine the theories that researchers have proposed to explain the Sodder children. 5 children vanished in a Christmas Eve fire that may not have been a fire. This is where the debate becomes most intense. because the theories reflect not just different interpretations of the same evidence, but fundamentally different assumptions about what is possible and what the past looked like. Understanding these theories is not just an academic exercise. Each one has been championed by serious researchers with genuine credentials, and each one captures something that the others miss. The truth, if it is ever established, will likely draw on elements of several. The first major explanation proposed by researchers holds that the kidnapping by the mafia theory has been the most persistent alternative explanation. George Sodder was a vocal critic of Benito Mussolini in the Italian-American community, and in the months before the fire, an unknown man had visited the house and told him that his children would be paid back for what you said about Mussolini. This threat, combined with the sabotage of the family's escape and rescue capabilities, the absence of remains, and the possible sightings of the children alive, has led researchers, including John Sodder, a surviving son, to conclude that organized crime elements kidnapped the children and used the fire as a cover. The motive might have been either revenge for George's anti-fascist statements or a demand for some form of compliance from George regarding his business. This interpretation has significant academic support and is backed by substantial evidence, but it is not without problems. Critics point out that it requires assumptions that go beyond what the evidence strictly supports, and that key predictions of this theory have not been confirmed by subsequent research. It remains contested, and the contest is productive. A rival school of thought argues that the accidental fire with criminal cover-up theory proposes that the fire was an accident caused by faulty wiring as originally claimed, but that the absence of remains and the subsequent cover-up by county officials reflect either incompetence or deliberate suppression. The initial coroner's declaration of death without adequate investigation, the failure to properly excavate the site, and the premature closing of the case within 30 days all suggest institutional failure. Under this theory, the children did die in the fire, but the remains were inadequately searched for, and the Sodder family's subsequent evidence of sabotage and survival was the product of grief and wishful thinking amplified by genuine investigative failures. This theory is controversial and deliberately so. Its proponents argue that the evidence demands an explanation outside the conventional framework. Critics counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the evidence presented, while suggestive, does not yet meet that standard. The debate continues in peer-reviewed literature. Perhaps the most unconventional theory suggests that the survival and secret adoption theory, which the Sodder family firmly believed, holds that the children were abducted during or immediately before the fire, transported to an unknown location, and subsequently raised by others, possibly under assumed identities. This theory requires a coordinated conspiracy involving multiple people to disable the equipment, set the fire, transport the children, and maintain silence over decades, but is consistent with the absence of remains, the sabotage evidence, the eyewitness sightings, and the 1967 photograph. If true, the children would today be elderly adults, some possibly with descendants who do not know their grandparents' true history. What is striking about this debate is not merely that experts disagree, that is normal and healthy in science. What is striking is the quality of the disagreement. Serious researchers, working from the same body of evidence, reaching genuinely different conclusions. That level of fundamental disagreement, when it persists over decades, is a signal that something important has not yet been understood. The question is not which of these theories is right. The question is whether any of them is right, or whether the truth is something that none of the current frameworks has yet been able to capture. The case surrounding the Sodder children, 5 children vanished in a Christmas Eve fire that may not have been a fire, does not rest on speculation alone. What distinguishes this investigation from pure mythology is the existence of documented, physical, verifiable evidence, material that has been examined by credentialed researchers and whose authenticity is not seriously disputed. What is disputed is its interpretation. let us review the most significant documented evidence as objectively as possible. We are not going to cherry-pick the data that supports a preferred conclusion. We are going to lay out what exists and let you draw your own assessment. Physical evidence supporting this account includes the sabotage of multiple escape and rescue mechanisms, the telephone line, the ladders, the gas line on George's truck is the strongest physical evidence that the fire was part of a planned operation rather than a simple accident. The simultaneous failure of 3 independent systems that George needed to either call for help or reach his children cannot reasonably be attributed to chance. Each failure individually could be explained. The conjunction of all 3 on the same night, combined with the subsequent absence of remains, constitutes a pattern that strongly suggests deliberate action by at least one person with advanced knowledge of the house layout and the family's emergency resources. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Investigators have documented the forensic consensus on the absence of remains is critical. Multiple forensic anthropologists who have reviewed the case have stated unambiguously that 5 children could not have been completely destroyed in a residential structure fire, leaving no recoverable bone material. Human bones, particularly the densest bones including teeth, femoral heads, and skull fragments, routinely survive structure fires at temperatures far exceeding those achievable in a wooden house. The only scenarios consistent with zero bone recovery are the children were not in the house when it burned, the remains were removed from the site before or after the fire, or the site was not adequately searched. All 3 scenarios are more consistent with the Sodder family's account than with the official story. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. On-site analysis revealed the 1967 photograph is physical evidence of a specific claim that merits investigation. The Sodder family retained the photograph and submitted it to forensic face comparison experts in the 2000s using modern technology. Results were inconclusive. The photograph quality was insufficient for definitive identification, but experts noted that the facial structure of the man in the photograph was consistent with how Louis Sodder's childhood facial features might have developed into adulthood. The simultaneous disappearance of private investigator Dale Hares after traveling to investigate the photograph's origin remains an unexplained event that, taken together with the photograph itself, suggests that the trail from the 1967 letter was real and someone wanted it not followed. This evidence has been subjected to independent verification. Skeptics have examined it. Alternative explanations have been proposed and tested. The data remains. The question of what it means remains open. Each individual piece of evidence might, in principle, be explained away. A single anomalous artifact might be misidentified. A single anomalous date might reflect contamination. A single anomalous eyewitness account might reflect misperception. The question is whether all of the evidence can be explained away, and whether the explanations required are more or less plausible than the evidence itself. When multiple independent lines of inquiry converge on the same conclusion, that convergence is the most powerful signal in empirical science. And that is exactly what we are seeing here. We have examined the history, the evidence, and the theories surrounding the Sodder children. 5 children vanished in a Christmas Eve fire that may not have been a fire. Now, we need to ask the question that is sometimes overlooked in discussions of ancient mysteries. Why does this matter? What does it mean for us today? It would be easy to file this away as an interesting historical curiosity, a puzzle from a distant past with no bearing on our present lives. That would be a fundamental mistake. The questions raised by this case touch on issues that are directly relevant to who we are, where we came from, and what the human story actually looks like before the period covered by conventional history. The Sodder Children case remains one of the most discussed and least resolved cold cases in American history. Modern forensic technology has been applied to the case repeatedly in the 2000s and 2010s, with teams from West Virginia University and independent investigators examining the available evidence. In 2010, the Fayette County Commission voted to allow a formal excavation of the original home site in the hope that additional physical evidence might remain in the soil. The excavation found bone fragments that were submitted for DNA analysis. The family provided DNA samples for comparison. Results were inconclusive due to the degraded state of the material. The surviving Sodder children and their descendants have maintained the family's conviction that the 5 missing siblings were abducted rather than killed. Sylvia Sodder, the youngest child to survive the fire, she was 2 at the time, has been the most prominent family spokesperson in recent years and has consistently maintained that the official account is inconsistent with the physical evidence. The case was extensively featured on the podcast Case File in 2018 and in a 2020 documentary that brought renewed attention and new tips. The question of what happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty Sodder on Christmas Eve 1945 remains open, and the possibility that some of them lived long lives without ever knowing who they really were refuses to be dismissed. Furthermore, the tools available to investigate these questions are advancing rapidly. Satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, ancient DNA analysis, isotopic tracing, and deep-sea sonar are all providing capabilities that previous generations of researchers could only dream of. Cases that were genuinely unresolvable 10 years ago are now open to new analysis, and the findings, consistently, are expanding rather than contracting the mystery. The investigation continues. New discoveries are being made. New analyses are being published. New voices are entering the conversation from disciplines that were not previously part of the discussion. The answers, when they come, and they will come, will not merely solve a historical puzzle. They will force a fundamental revision of assumptions that underpin our entire understanding of human history and human potential. We have now walked through the complete case of the Sodder children. 5 children vanished in a Christmas Eve fire that may not have been a fire, from the Historica El record through the physical evidence, across the competing theories, and into the modern significance of what remains unresolved. What the story of Sodder children ultimately reveals is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions back at us, our assumptions about what ancient people were capable of, about how knowledge is gained and lost across the centuries, and about the relationship between what we know and what we merely think we know. The evidence present in this documentary is real. The questions it raises are genuine. The debate among researchers is ongoing, and that is healthy. Science is not a set of conclusions. It is a process, and the process requires that we remain open to evidence that challenges what we thought we knew, however uncomfortable that challenge might be. If you came to this documentary as a skeptic, we hope the evidence gave you something to think about. If you came as a true believer, we hope the critical examination gave you a more nuanced picture. The truth, as always, lies in the evidence, not in what we want to be true. Thank you for watching. If this investigation sparked your curiosity, please help us reach more people. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. If you are watching on Facebook, tap the follow button on our page to stay connected. We publish new documentaries every week, covering the full range of historical mysteries that the mainstream has not yet adequately explained. Leave a comment telling us which case you want us to investigate next. The conversation continues. The investigation never ends.